In lecture, we finished talking about Bordetella pertussis. Again, we're in that gram-negative rods, gram-negative bacilli, which most of the gram-negative bacteria gram stain as. And then because there's so many gram-negative rods or bacilli, we group them based on their oxygen requirements. So we've already gone over the facultatively anaerobic, meaning they can live in both environments. And now we're into that strictly aerobic. They require oxygen. They cannot live in an anaerobic environment. So we've gotten through Brucella melanotenensis. We've gotten through Bordetella pertussis. Now we're on to Pseudomonas. Of the Pseudomonas species out there, the one that causes the most issues in the medical realm is Pseudomonas aeruginosa. It's found in soil and organic matter. Sometimes it's found in water sources. I put my little note on here that it is oxidase positive. I only put that on there is because we use an oxidase test. So if they're oxidase positive, we say they're oxidative to help divide, not an even division, but help divide the facultatively anaerobic. However, that doesn't mean that these two genus of bacteria are the only oxidase positive organisms. It's just of the facultatively anaerobic they are. So Pseudomonas is still an oxidase positive bacteria. It's not normal flora. It's not something that, well, it's found in the digestive tract and causes issues if it goes somewhere else. This is one, once it gets picked up, it's because it's gotten picked up, not because it went somewhere else. And depending on where it gets picked up, it can colonize any organ and colonize any organ systems. It's a huge problem in hospital settings because that's where you have a lot of immunocompromised patients. But one of the bigger characteristics of Pseudomonas aeruginosa, other than being aerobic, is that it really loves the moistest environment that it can grow in. I mean, most bacteria love a nice, warm, moist environment. This one thrives in a higher moisture environment. And so immunocompromised patients, again, you just have that weakened immune system. It can cause issues. But the other populations that it causes a lot of issues for are those that have cystic fibrosis or third-degree burn victims. Third-degree burn victims is because we remove that first line of defense. And once you remove that skin layer, you have all of that interstitial fluid in the tissues that's not being contained by your skin. And that's a huge problem. So you've lost your first line of defense, but all of that fluid now that can come out is a breeding ground for where this bacteria loves to get in. And that's what this picture is showing, the third-degree burns. This whole patient is just covered in Pseudomonas aeruginosa, unfortunately. And it does produce kind of a greenish pigment, which we can see through the bandages. Cystic fibrosis patients as well, is because cystic fibrosis, they end up with a lot of excessive mucus and fluid in their lungs that they have to constantly be trying to remove and cough out. And it's that additional fluid mucus in their lungs that this bacteria likes to colonize. Other than it's, can go anywhere and cause issues, it's also a bacteria that's naturally drug resistant to a lot of antibiotics, and it's developing even additional drug resistance. And so it's becoming a lot harder to treat. It can also form biofilms. And so in hospital settings, catheters, any type of medical equipment, this is a bacteria that can cause a lot of issues. Because it causes a lot of issues in healthcare settings, it's in our list of bacteria that are top bacteria that are nosocomial, or more commonly known, healthcare-associated infections. So in my pie chart, there's a whole bunch of gram-positive bacteria that cause healthcare-associated infections, but most of the gram-negative bacteria that cause healthcare infections are in that Enterobacteriaceae group. They're a fecal found bacteria that goes somewhere where it shouldn't go. Pseudomonas is the one that's not. Mike, it still is a top healthcare associated bacteria, but it's not a fecally found bacteria. The next of our aerobic gram-negative rods is Francisella tularensis. It's a very short rod. It's a coxobacillus, so it's almost round-shaped, but not quite. It's an intracellular parasite. So it loves to get inside of cells Um, and again, it's a wonderful protective place for it, as the immune system can't always recognize that it's there, at least not right away. And so until the immune system gets kind of turned on and triggered that it's there, it grows kind of uncontrolled. It's found in a large assortment of hosts, usually a lot of different types of animals. So in the United States, we find it in rabbits, which is why sometimes it's called rabbit fever. Muskrats, we find it in ticks. That's usually how it spreads from animal to animal, as well as other rodents. We seem to see a lot more cases in the summer months because that's when ticks are out, various types of deer flies that it can be in as well and go from animal to animals. But in the winter months, we don't have a lot of insects that are moving things around. If it does get in the body, it causes tularemia, because it is the Francisella tularensis. And again, once it gets into the tick or once it's picked up by an infected animal, it could also be picked up if you're ingesting meat from an infected animal. So if you're eating rabbit that were infected, drinking water that these animals have been inhabiting and this bacteria is in there. But it also can be spread by aerosols. So if you've got a pet rabbit or, like it could sneeze on you, it is highly infectious. Just 10 of these need to get in the body and it will cause disease. It's also very deadly if untreated. So again, treatment, it's treatable, but if left untreated, it does cause death in about 30% of those that do pick this bacteria up. So it's got a low infectious dose and a high mortality rate. We do have a vaccine for at-risk individuals. So people that breed rabbits, that have or maybe work out with animals out in the wild, DNR type jobs. We do have a vaccine for at-risk individuals. Because of the low dose and the high mortality rate, it actually makes our agents of bioterrorism poster. So these are the top 4 bacteria that are considered agents of bioterrorism. It's usually because they have low infectious dose, meaning it's very easily to spread, and they have a high mortality rate, again, if left untreated. So we've got this poster down the hall in our MLT lab. The next of our aerobic gram-negative rods is Legionella pneumophila. It is pleomorphic, which means it can have it's still a gram-negative rod, but they can vary in their size and shape a little bit. This one is generally tied to water sources. We pick it up by inhaling water that has this, and you're like, well, I don't inhale water. But if you're in the shower, and there's water, you could inhale water if just water splashes up in your nose, but even the steam, hot tubs, that's a very warm, moist environment if hot tubs don't have the correct chemicals. And again, it has the bubbling, the steam, you breathe it in, even grocery store misters. And so it's generally picked up by inhalation, or it can be picked up by drinking contaminated water as well. It causes a condition known as Legionnaire's disease, based on the name Legionella, that causes fever, chills, pneumonia, diarrhea, usually more fatal or more, worse signs and symptoms for those that are immunocompromised. It is treatable. We do have some different antibiotics. It's not generally your normal penicillin that's used to treat it, but it is treatable. Usually we see outbreaks of this, not because it's spread person to person. It's because one water contaminated source affects a large group of individuals. It's originally named Legionella is just because they originally tied it back. I couldn't tell you what year offhand, that there was like a legion, how we've got, the various military legions, the buildings, that there was a contaminated water source and you had a large number of elderly veterans that were all in the legion that have picked it up, and a lot of them had died because of it, and they discovered this new bacteria that caused this. We've had some cases, I know it's in the last 10 years, that UW-Madison, one of their hospital settings, had a contaminated water supply. Several individuals, immunocompromised, died from it. In the Dells, there was Christmas Mountain in the Dells, also had a contaminated water source that they found that it had several cases linked to it. So it's around. If you usually hear cases, again, it's usually an outbreak that they've tied back to some contaminated water source. Well, there was my UW hospital one, 2018. And then our last group are strictly anaerobic. They will not grow in an oxygen environment, gram-negative rods. So our anaerobic gram-negative rods, we've got a lot of anaerobic gram-negative rods that are normal flora. We find them in the digestive tract, we find them in the respiratory tract, we find them in the reproductive tract, and they're great. Like, they are part of our normal flora. They can inhibit the growth of other organisms because, again, they got there first. They've kind of staked their claim. They're not going to let other pathogens reside there. Some of them can make vitamins. Some of them can make vitamin precursors. Some of them aid in digestion. The problem, though, is if they get somewhere outside of where they're supposed to be found, if they leave the digestive tract, if they leave the respiratory tract, if they leave the reproductive tract, and go to a new location, that's when they cause disease. So our first group, our first genus is bacteroids. It's part of the normal flora of the intestine and the upper respiratory tract. That's what my URT stands for. And of the bacteroids species, the one that generally causes the most issues is Bacteroides fragilis, which I just like the name. Again, it has multiple virulence factors that allow it to be able to cause disease. Depending on where it goes, depends on what kind of condition that it can cause. It can cause abdominal infections if it gets outside of the GI tract. It can cause genital infections if it gets into the reproductive tract. If it gets into an open wound, it can cause wound infections. This one is a big one that are going surge tech, that work in those surgeries. If there's any surgery that has to do with the digestive tract, this is a bacteria that we cannot allow outside of the digestive tract. So it's a lot of, if you're working on surgery, you have to be very cautious of any bacteria that might be found in the digestive tract, that during and after surgery, that none of those got out. Because if they go somewhere else, they will cause infections. Metronidazole is generally the top antimicrobial that's used for treating it. So it's treatable. But again, our best bet is prevention, that we don't get to that point. One of the ways for diagnosing some of these anaerobic gram-negative rods is putting them on a plate that contains bile. So bacteroids, because it's part of the normal flora of the intestine, it has evolved that it can survive in a bile-rich environment. It's fine. So if we have a plate that in the media itself, in that agar, there is bile in it, it will still grow just fine. Unlike our next group of bacteria, that's not part of the normal flora of the intestinal tract. So it's never evolved to ever be able to survive in a bile-rich environment. So our next bacteria is Prevotella, and it's part of the normal flora in the urinary tract, the reproductive tract, and the upper respiratory tract. It is not found in part of the normal flora of the intestinal tract. And so it is very sensitive to bile. If we put it on any type of agar on a plate that has bile, it will not grow. It does, again, have several virulence factors that allow it to cause disease. And again, it's just like wherever it goes, that's the type of infection that it can cause. So if it gets into the sinuses or into the ear canal, it can cause sinus and ear infections. If it gets in anywhere around the mouth, it can cause periodontal infections. If it gets into the reproductive tract, somewhere where it's not supposed to be, it can cause various types of gynecological infections. It can get into wounds or into the cerebrospinal fluid, cause brain abscesses. If it gets into the digestive tract, it can cause abdominal infections. Again, it just depends on where it goes. If it gets outside of that normal floral realm where it's found, that's usually when it causes the issues. Treatment, depending on the infection, it may require removing infected tissue, and then it's usually some type of broad spectrum antibiotic like carbapenem, or anywhere in that same grouping of antibiotics. And so this is another one too, that those that go into surge tech, this is a bacteria to be very, very cautious for. That if you're doing surgery in any particular area, you have to remember surgery in one area, you have to be able to prevent bacteria from leaving that one area and going into somewhere else, because it's going to cause infections there. And so we'll finish up right there.